Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Simon podcast. And I hope you are all having a wonderful day. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about summer camp. Now, I don't know about you, Micah, but it seems like more and more summer camps continue to keep closing or they continue to downsize. And and the topic that we're going to be talking about today is kind of are summer camps needed more than ever? And we'll kind of talk a little bit more into what we mean by that. But again, joining me today is Micah Current. Micah, how are you doing today?
Doing well. We're knee deep into summer, and you know, it's
We
uh,
are.
it's quiet around the where I work. I mean, it's a university, so summer is usually dead because the students are gone and less traffic and stuff. It's just nice.
Well, yeah, and it's quiet here at the church because especially if you're a church that has like a preschool, you're probably used to hearing kids play at the playground, kids moving around, and it's like I think like besides the secretary, like I'm the only one here in the office. Like it's so quiet. But that's okay. It allows me to get work done or allows me to get more podcasting done. Or both. So that's where we're at. So with our theme of summer camp, stories gone wild, Micah, do you have any like wild summer camp stories?
Uh, yeah. So back in I think it was 2013, I was counseling at Camp Lebanon, and I had spent pretty much the whole summer there. I had led worship for the worship team. For all the camps, and I also did I counseled each week for each camp. And so one of the camps I counseled was the Camp 3-5, which is camp third grade through fifth grade. And so if you ever want to not sleep at church camp, counsel for Camp 3-5. Um, but anyway, one one night Scott didn't even laugh. Third graders through fifth graders, they don't know when to shut up when you're like you do a devotion at the end of the night, you pray, you turn the lights off, and they don't stop talking and they don't stop crying and freaking out and all this stuff. So
Mhm.
um, if you want your patience tested, do be a counselor for Camp 3-5. But anyway, that year and that week, particularly with the camp, 3-5, we, had went through, I think it was like, I don't know, Monday to Friday or Monday to Thursday or something like that. And about halfway through the week, we got a really, really bad thunderstorm. So bad that, they were talking tornadoes. And so they were like, everybody keep your phones on, keep them next to your ears and your head when you're sleeping. And so at the time, I was doing an internship at a church. I was working full time at a music store doing, repairs for band instruments and selling instruments and, sales and things like that. And I was doing summer camps. And so what I would do is I would work during the day at the music store, and then I would come back to camp after I was done with my shift at the music store, lead worship, do the evening stuff, sleep, get up and do it all over again. And so about 3 o'clock in the morning, the tornado sirens start going off. And we had to run these kids to the main building, which is called Founders Hall. And it was the only building that had secure place for tornadoes because as well as I do, Scott, with cabins out in the middle of the woods, if
Oh
something
yeah.
happened, you'd be screwed because there's no basement, there's no safety. So escorting, 15, 20 kids to the Founders Hall in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning. Uh, Tornado sirens are going off. Our cell phone service sucks, by the way, because it's out in the middle of the woods. So we don't know what's
Yeah.
accurate. It's not. And so the long and the short of it is we're just sitting there and we put all these kids, we put the boys on the one side and the girls on the other. They brought their blankets and their pillows and they basically slept in Founders Hall that night. I didn't get any sleep. I had to go to work the next morning. And yeah, what a time.
I have a similar story. It was fourth and fifth grade camp at Marengo, and it was just bad weather, nothing like tornadoes, but just a lot of wind, a lot of thunderstorms, a lot of rain, etc. And the problem is it was one of those camps where the girls were miserable because none of the girls would sleep, and then they'd be tired and cranky, and then they just be very very difficult to deal with as a female counselor. And then during crash time, when it's time to, have a nap or lay down, the girls didn't want to have nap time. It's like, so they're just, so every night when we get there, we get into the cabin, it's fine. And then in the middle of the night, there'd be storms. Like around midnight, everything else storms. And it was like that every single day. So then Tuesday comes around. I think it was Tuesday. And I remember we're going to our room. We're me and my we had our after evening activity. We go back to our cabins, brush our teeth, do whatever. We go to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I'm hearing someone screaming my name because I'm a heavy sleeper, screaming my name. I finally wake up and all my boys are screaming because we left the windows open because it was cool. So it's like, let's get the cool air in there because there's no AC in these cabins. And all of a sudden, I wake up and all I see is my kids screaming. I can hear the rustling and the wind of everything going around to the point the dirt on the floor is starting to make a spiral because of how much wind's coming through here. So I just say, kids, grab your mattresses, grab your blankets and pillows, just throw them down on the ground. And we just got down on the ground. So we got away from the windows, got down on the ground, and did that. All went back to sleep. We all wake up. I'm looking around. I'm trying to do a head count, and I'm missing a camper. I'm
Oh
like,
no.
I'm like, where's my camper at? Sure enough, he was still sleeping on the top bunk. He slept through all of that. He was so anyway, so then that happened. So then I go to have our staff meeting. I'm going to our morning staff meeting while my kids are getting ready to have breakfast. And our director decided, because the girls at this point are just miserable. None of the girl campers have slept. The counselors are miserable. So the director decided we're going to have everyone sleep in Crowder Hall. So all the girls slept in the basement. All the guys slept in the upper Crowder. So we go and we're getting all our stuff, and my kids and I are just like, can we just sleep in our cabin? Like, we're fine. Like, we sleep, we're good. We don't want to have to sleep with a bunch of loud kids because my cabin, for so whatever reason, did not. We're not when it was time for lights out. They went to sleep. They were not staying up talking in the wee hours. They were done. So we go in there, and I had my sleeping bag and my pillow and stuff somewhere. And then one of the counselors, the older adult counselors, decided he's just going to take my spot and just threw all my stuff off. I'm like, okay, so now I'm sleeping in this one spot where I'm getting a security light shining in my face the whole time. So at some point during the night, while everyone's finally asleep, like at 1 o'clock in the morning, couple of my kids wake me up and go, "Hey, can we go back to our cabin?" I'm like, "Is everybody in our groups up?" And they're like, "Yeah, everyone's go back." I go, "Okay, be very quiet, grab your stuff." And we snuck out of the crowd and went back to our cabin, sleep in our cabin, because we were just like, we were fine. But at least the girls were able to get enough sleep, and everyone was happy after that. And then after that day, all the storms kind of passed. So the next couple of days, everyone could sleep in their cabins, and we didn't have to worry about like late night storms happening, keeping everybody awake. But oh my gosh, it's just miserable when you have a big storm and you don't know what to do. And again, like you said, when you only have so much basement space and you can't fit everybody down there, so you're just cram packed in there, it just makes things very miserable.
Yeah. I could talk about the time I was a camper and went to Camp Marengo and got poison ivy from the firewood.
I got poison ivy from firewood at Marengo too. Oh, my
Um,
arm. Oh, gross.
it was like the first night, and the uh they did like I love how the cabins are set up at Marengo. Like they had all the
Hmm.
cabins down there was a fire pit. So anyway, like I
Hmm.
got fire smoke, the smoke in the firewood.
Hmm.
Um, and it was so bad that they had to take me to the emergency room and give me like a prednisone shot. And I was on prednisone, and it felt like it took that entire summer for that poison ivy to dry up. Like it was all over. My eyes were swollen shut. It was bad news bears. Um,
Ugh.
I'm from Marengo, but I had some pretty rough memories there.
Yeah. Oh my
Or I think about the
gosh.
time that John Trussell made me hug a tree because I wasn't listening.
Ah, the chugging of the tree parts were great. Oh my gosh.
That would never fly today.
Well, you know what though? I was told that we had to make kids hug trees because I couldn't make them do push-ups because that's what I would do. I'd make my kids do push-ups or I make them do physical activity. Like, hey, we're going to go run today. So we start running laps. And people are like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, my kids weren't behaving well. So we're running laps. Like, yeah, you can't do that. Make them hug a tree. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Which
John
that's
Trussell
another
made me
funny
hug a
story
tree one.
about a time when someone refused to hug a tree for me and the amount of torture I did to that poor kid. I don't know if I shared that with I've shared that story, but I don't know if I've ever shared that on this podcast. But anyway, we're not here to talk about torturing kids at summer camp. We're talking about our summer camps needed more than ever. So, Camp Lebanon's still operating. Is that correct, Micah?
Yes.
As far as
And
you know?
honestly, and yes, it is. Andy Hoover, a good friend of mine, he's been the director for several years now, and he's now the lead. He was the youth pastor at Day Spring Church in Cincinnati, and now he's the
Yeah.
lead pastor. So I don't know if he's continuing his role as director of camps, church camps.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they've shifted a little bit of how they do things in respect to like camp meeting and church camps. It
Yeah.
used to be camps, then camp meeting. Now they do camp meeting like Memorial Day weekend, and it's actually going on right now is the date of this recording.
Oh,
And so
that's
they go,
interesting.
yeah,
Wow.
they start Sunday before Memorial Day and they go through that week. And then they start church camps the following week and they go through June. And they usually do high school camp, Camp 3-5, middle school camp. And then they throw in the Camp K2 and the young adult weekend retreat
Mm.
camp as well. So the whole month of June is church camps. And from what I understand, the way that I like have understood over the last couple of years, I haven't been actively as involved over the past couple of years as I'd like to. There was a period of time where I was there every single year doing everything from leading Bible studies to counseling to leading worship to being an assistant director, whatever. But the interesting piece is that you pose the question for the topic of this podcast: are church camps needed now more than ever? And I would say yes. Um, some would say no, and that they're a dying art form. But like from what I gather, Camp Marine or not Camp Marine, sorry, Camp Lebanon has done really, really well over the last couple of years, and like this year, so much so that like we're getting emails every week on some of the listeners that I'm on. Hey, we still need counselors. We don't have enough counselors, and they've been turning away students because they don't have enough space. So it's a good problem to have. And Southwest Ohio is a pretty big district as far as the church
Yeah.
goes concerned. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think the camp business is doing really well, and I think camp meeting in Southwest Ohio, like I would say, camp meeting as a whole, the whole idea. I'm not a big fan of camp meeting. I kind of grew out of it, but the camp meeting is doing well in the state of Ohio. Like we have Berlin, we have Springfield, we have Lebanon. Um, I think and we have Warsaw. Warsaw's the other one. Um, and they all do relatively well every year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I know that,
Berlin has like a thing during their camp meeting as well. Berlin
yeah,
Center up in Northeast
and
Ohio.
yeah, and I think I said Berlin, but like Warsaw,
Oh, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
yeah, I said Berlin, Warsaw, Lebanon, and Springfield all have camp meetings.
Yeah.
Um, I will say that it's crazy, but Camp Warsaw, man, they do really well, and they do almost 2 weeks, 2 full weeks of camp meeting every year, and people
Yeah.
like do vacations and camp there, and it's just yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
um, yeah, church camps I think are doing well in the state of Ohio, from what I understand.
Yeah, and it's been very interesting with summer camps because again I was a big worker of Marengo, and when the governing body or the General Assembly decided to shut down the camp and sell it off like that, A, I thought that was a big mistake, and B, I felt like that they shut it down right when they shut down the camp right when things were still continuing to progress and climb at camp. Because there's a time within this at Marengo where your attendance was kind of here, and then it just started to spike. And even after I left in 2009, I would still continue to go back to just do like acting camps there, and it would still continue to thrive. And then when they shut it down, it was kind of a big blow. That I guess in some ways it kind of helped. I mean, I think in some ways it kind of helped your regional camps. I mean, besides Lebanon, because I felt like Lebanon, and we talked about this before, or I don't know if you and I've talked about this, but me and people like Marengo have talked about this before. Um, that the nice thing about Camp Lebanon is that if Camp Lebanon didn't exist and all those kids were coming to Marengo, we would not be able to house all those kids. So, even though Camp Lebanon, especially Southwest Ohio, kind of took a lot of most of the Southwest youth went to Camp Lebanon instead of Marengo. Very few did come to Marengo. But if Lebanon didn't exist, then as a summer camp, then Marengo would be screwed. We'd be turning a lot of people away because we didn't have the adequate space to be able to do things. Um, but needless to say, I feel like after Marengo closed, there really wasn't a lot of, how do I say it? I feel like when it comes to youth, as far as a place where youth can kind of unwind, relax, be connected, learn about God, and even have some type of discipleship, there really isn't much of anything like that, like a summer camp that can hit all these different kids, no matter where they are within their spiritual journey. In some ways, I feel like summer camp was very good for the kids who had no relationship with Jesus Christ. Summer camp was great for kids to invite their non-church friends to come because they know they're going to swim and have fun and do all that stuff and learn a little bit about Jesus. But, I think a lot of times we've had kids who came and had no concern about being a Christian or following Jesus at all, and then end up becoming a follower of Jesus. And then I think the other time is it was a great way for a lot of students to continue to grow in your faith. I mean, I know a lot of kids always say Marengo was the place that like helped them recharge their batteries um after the full year. Um and now it seems like, besides like you have like convention, but I feel like convention you have you have like your worship and lessons, and then you have like your classes, but you don't really have the intimate relationship building that you would at a
At a
summer camp than at a convention, at a youth convention. um and it's a shame because I feel like a lot of times with camps are very expensive to keep up, especially if you are a church who didn't really have a good model of finances and how to keep track and kind of like, well, how much are we going to charge due to food cost and building upkeep and staff payment? And, there's a lot of stuff that goes to the camp. And if you're not very good at making sure you raise your rates to kind of help cover that cost, then you're kind of screwed. I was at a camp up in near Plain City, or not Plain City, up by oh, I don't even remember where it was. Somewhere off of 71 North, way past there, like almost before you hit Ashland, for our confirmation retreat. And we booked it for a confirmation retreat. And then I got an email saying that after summer that they're closing the camp. And in some ways I knew why, because when I got there, I'm like, well, has a lot of great land, has a lot of great opportunities, but man, these buildings look very dated, and you really need to overhaul on some of these repairs to some of these buildings. Um, and I don't think they could. And I think that's a shame when it comes to summer camps, is there is that financial cost of things. Um, but yeah, like other than
Well,
that, like, yeah, go ahead, Micah.
no, I was gonna say, well, let me ask you this. Like I was a camper as a young child, going to Marengo, and then uh when I was super young, I went to Lebanon. So I went to Lebanon as a young kid, in grade school. More towards middle school, I went to Marengo because it was closer where my dad was pastoring at the time. And then as an adult and a young adult, like a young adult to present, I've been a part of Lebanon again. But I don't know. Obviously, Marengo's closed, and you can speak more into that than I can because you spent more time there. But I know that Lebanon has done a lot of work to um, build relationships with the community around them, and you know yes, we have, fall retreats and there's weddings there, and there are different opportunities throughout the year to use the camp and, make sure that it's kept. You know, the proper upkeep is happening, throughout the year. It's not just like
Yeah.
during the month of June when we have summer camps, but like I also know that they rent the space for band camps to happen,
Yeah.
right? So like
Hmm.
high schools will come out and they'll have their band camps for weeks at a time and they'll pay to rent that space. I know that they, like I said earlier, they do weddings and people have to pay to use the space for weddings. They've also created space for pastors to go on retreat. And there's a space there where pastors
Hmm.
can go. I think pastors can actually use it for free. They just have to provide their own, linens and, bring their own food, etc. But they can use the space for free. Um, and there are various things throughout the year. Like in the fall, there's a lot of youth groups that use the space for, fall retreats, and so they pay to use the space for that. All that to say that Lebanon has done a great job of raising money every year throughout the year to make, compensation happen to keep the property
Yeah.
in condition over the years.
Yeah.
I don't know if
So
Moringa did anything like that when they were
they
still in.
did. So yeah, like everything you're saying, Marengo did. Like we had band camps.
Okay.
Now where I think kind of things went, like we did offer rentals, so people could rent out. Like pastors, there's the pastors' quarters, and if you're a pastor, you could stay there for free. You just gotta call and just see if the time if it's available, right? Um, but where I think there's a couple things that kind of led to Marengo's demise. First of all, is as we kept growing, the payment for a cost for the kid to come to camp was still relatively cheap. Like I think if I remember, like the first camp I went to Berlin. They had a kids camp and I had a bad experience there. And then the next year I went to Marengo, and Marengo was so much better, but Marengo was also more expensive than going to Berlin. Um, but we went there, had a good time, and then I think when we installed the ropes course, which would have been like late 90s when the ropes course got installed, then they raised it to kind of help, you know, cover all the equipment and stuff that we're using for the ropes course. It wasn't until when John became the director and really started getting a good eye on how much we're spending on stuff that it was like, okay, we need to raise our rates. And then when John decided to start the year-round program, which he handpicked me to be a part of that back in 2017, or no, I'm sorry, 2007. When we did that, like that was to kind of engage. Because I mean, like Lebanon, like when I've been to Camp Lebanon, like there's a lot of stuff around Lebanon. It's not very it's a little bit secluded, but not all the way secluded like Marengo was. Like Marengo, there's like nothing around in Marengo. Couple gas stations.
It's literally in the middle of nowhere.
It is. So the way that we did is we built relationships with churches. And we said, hey, if you guys want to do a retreat, so Meadow Park was doing their family camps there. There was actually a pastors like couples retreat that we hosted, so pastors and their wives could come, and we did like a little program thing, and they got to do whatever. Also the men's ministry, when they did their ox roast, they would kind of help with some of the costs and everything else, and even they were kind of the big proponents of building certain things at camp to kind of help with. And so where things kind of went awry is we were increasing our rates, And it got to the point, and here's the thing, and again, this is my opinion based off information that I've witnessed through just looking at financials that I had some privy to, and then even just stuff that I was told from people from the campsite, and even, my dad who got to look at the budget and kind of saw what was going on. Um, and even some of the meetings at GA when I was left camp, when the camp was still in operation. What led to Marengo's demise was simply um, the camp was growing, but not a lot of churches were giving to Ohio Ministries.
Yeah.
And Ohio Ministries was in big trouble. So what eventually ended up like there was a couple of like shady things that went down. Like one time, Jeremy Jordan's dad was at a meeting and he noticed that the that Camp Marengo or the year-round camp was paying for all the paper and the copier and the electricity for Ohio Ministries. That was coming out of our budget. And Jeremy asked the question, hey, I noticed that looking at the camp's budget that we're seeing that we're paying Ohio Ministries electric bill and their copier maintenance and everything else like that. Why is that? And the explanation that was given at General Assembly was, well, because ONET, which is not even part of camp, that's like the youth governance board. ONET has their meetings here at Ohio Ministries and they use our copier. So they're charging the camp for it. So once Jeremy heard that, he goes, oh, okay. And then the next thing you know, they just met at the camp and they never met back at Ohio Ministries. So the next time, if we were still paying the electricity bill, we could say, well, no, we can't pay it because ONET hasn't been meeting at Ohio Ministries offices for the past year. So there was that. And then eventually, when they're going to vote on closing the camp, um, my dad was looking at the budget because they kept saying that the camp wasn't making money. But then when my dad was looking at the budget, he's like, well, wait a minute. There's some things on here that I would not be comfortable presenting to a bunch of pastors because it's inaccurate. There's a lot of things that was being charged as a deficit to the camp that actually was not a camp expense. It was an OM expense. So ultimately, they sold the camp or they closed down Camp Marengo. There was one time where the camp was up for sale and no one knew about it. And someone happened to find it and said, what's this? So people started posting it going, wait, why is the camp being sold? Because there's still summer camp happening. Like they closed down the year-round program, but they were still keeping the summer camp stuff. And the crazy thing is if Ohio Ministries would have waited 1 year, the year-round camp would have been self-sustaining and we would not have to need Ohio Ministries. And Ohio Ministries could have just severed ties with the camp and the camp could have been self-sufficient without having any type of financial support from Ohio Ministries. They just needed to wait 1 year and it would have been done. So they sold the camp, they got all this money, great. But yet the problem is you still don't have a lot of churches giving to Ohio Ministries. And then the other issue too is there's sometimes where Ohio Ministries get mad because there'd be churches that would give to the camp, but they would not give to Ohio Ministries. And even during like any type of events, like let's say convention or even General Assembly, the year-round camp team would set up a booth to talk about camp, but then they'd also have to talk about Ohio Ministries and giving money to Ohio Ministries, even though they're technically not employees of Ohio Ministries. So again, that's perception, that's my opinion, based on things that I've heard and things that I've witnessed and just kind of some conclusions I draw. But yeah, that's what happened. Um, and it's a shame because I think now, I mean, my niece is in youth and she goes to like conventions and everything else. But even like when my niece wasn't in youth, when I would just go and I would see kids come back from like a convention or come back from a camp, you could just tell they're excited, they're passionate about the Lord. They there's a lot of stuff. And sometimes people will come back from convention now and it's almost like Yeah, it was great, but now it's back to the grind. Like it's almost like they enjoy their time being at convention, but there's nothing that really leads to a very impactful change. Maybe for some students they do, like especially those who are into church all the time, who go to church regularly, who are very committed to their faith in Christ. But when you have kids who are coming who maybe have no relationship with Jesus Christ, or they're coming you know, because a friend invited them, or they're coming because the state, because we used to get a lot of kids from like the juvenile system to come to our camp at Marengo because Wade had connections as a judge, and sometimes he'd send these kids to camp to help become better, to help them. And there's times where we've had some of those kids come to camp who, rough edge kids who they come out and they just love Jesus and they're just on fire Jesus and they want to go to church and they want to come back next year and they want to be part of all the different like if they're from Central they want to be part of like the Central sports program. If they happen to be at Southwest, they want to be part of camp meeting over at Lebanon. There are so many different things that these kids were always passionate after they left summer camp. And now I feel like kids just going to a convention, yeah, they enjoy their time there, but they're not very passionate because I think in a lot of ways it's not just kids coming in and sitting at a lecture style thing like a church. A lot of times at summer camp, it's more of a community base. When I would teach our morning sessions, when I was the teacher, a lot of times the kids could sit anywhere. They could sit on the floor. They could sit at tables, and we made sure that when I taught, it was more interactive, more question based. It wasn't just me lecturing, it was more having dialogue. And I think just simple things that you can get away with in a camp setting that you wouldn't be able to get away with at a convention or even a church kind of allows people to feel like they're connected to what you're teaching. They're more open because you don't have this structure, rigorous rule of a church or a convention versus the kind of the fluidity of a summer camp.
Hmm.
And sometimes I wonder if that's hurting future church leaders because they're not
You're not getting them as a result because some people feel they're
we're
called
not
there.
getting them from result because they're and I feel like a lot of times with camps, because a lot of times guards are down and people feel like the kids can feel like they can be themselves, they can worship however they want to or whatever. I think a lot of times you're very easy to see people who have natural leadership ability that you can invest in. Where if I'm in a conference setting, then, oh, well, I'm being recommended by the youth pastor. I'm being recommended by these people. I'm being recommended by my youth board within my district. But then there's some kids who I think there are some kids who are in leadership now in church leadership who probably wouldn't be in that position if it wasn't for summer camp. Because people like me, people like some of the counselors, people like other staff members, like a John Trussell, or would be able to see some of these kids and go, okay, this kid's going to do great. Yeah, right now he's a rough around the edges. Right now he's doesn't seem like he'd be a great leader, but he is going to be a great leader because we see it because the walls have been down. There's no masks, there's no personas. This is them because again, they're worshiping with other kids, they're hanging out with other kids. Um, they're being free. They're in a cabin with other kids, sleeping overnight with different kids, not just the kids within their youth group, but kids from all over the state. And I feel like those relationships are good. Like conventions are great, but when you go to the hotel room, my niece isn't staying with other girls from different churches. She's staying with people from Talmadge. And it's great to build that relationship within Talmadge, but what relationships are you building throughout the various students throughout the states or throughout your districts? Especially if you don't go, if especially if you're on vacation during like a camp meeting and you're not there to do the youth portion of camp meeting. Like So, and in some ways, I think summer camps are more needed than other. And I think a lot of times those who still have church camps running, you know, I think it's very important for them to send letters to, if they're, especially if you're connected to a church, it's important for those camps to send letters to churches and build those relationships and say, hey, here's some of the things that we can offer you. I mean, right now, like we haven't, West Ohio Conference, we haven't had summer camps in 2 years because we have three camps. They're shuttering two, and then they're using all the money for the two camps that they're shuttering to invest into the one. So East Ohio Conference has been great with allowing West Ohio kids to go to their camps. But I think a lot of times it's like, well, I was used to this camp, and I think there's still that mourning process. Yeah, hey, even when Marengo did the thing, like, hey, we're still having Camp Marengo, we're just meeting at a different campground. We're not meeting at the same spot. The kids go, yeah, but it wasn't the same experience because there's still a sense of mourning there. And there's a lot of memories attached to a certain place or certain things you just can't that you just can't replicate anymore.
Yeah. So kind of circling back, to answer your initial question, do you think that church camps are needed now more than ever?
Yeah, I mean, and here's why. Because I feel like the reason why church camps are needed more than ever is because so much what students are dealing with today is that they have found comfort in technology. And yeah, I mean, I can chat on Facebook, I can chat on Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. I can make connections with people, but I'm not making really real. There's a difference between me connecting with someone on the internet and me connecting with someone face to face. And even though Marengo at one time changed their policy and allowed phones, like kids access their phones and stuff, which I'm like, oh, okay. Because before it was like no electronics whatsoever. But even then, like they still had some rules because they still want to making sure that you're connecting with other kids, that you're building relationships, that you're learning about Jesus without any distractions or not getting text messages from a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a mom or a dad or seeing how many likes you got from an Instagram post. Like you're very immersed into the experience of what summer camp does and what summer camp is. Um, and I think that's the one thing that I think why summer camp's more needed than another because you are kind of taken out of your normal environment and you're put in an environment where you feel like you can have rest.
That's great.
And I mean, and I think, just recent statistics, especially with young people, we see more young people are dealing with mental health issues, more young people are dealing with suicide ideation. And I think a lot of that is because they're not in community. And even like at a conference, I could go to IYC or I could go to Ohio State Youth Conference, and yet I'll still have my phone attached to me. And yet I can, even when I'm sitting in a session, I can still look at my phone. I can still, if I don't like what the person's saying, I can sit in the back and I can just kind of
Check out.
text away or do whatever. Like I can, where in a summer camp setting, depending on what their policy is, like, yeah, there's times where you can be on your phone and you can do stuff, but there's also times where you're not, like you don't have your addiction tool right next to you. You are right there. So especially if you're dealing with, I have no friends, all my friends are just digital friends, and I feel like I don't have very meaningful connections. And not only are you having a meaningful connection with God in a camp environment, but now you have other students that are connecting with you in a real personal way that love you and care about you. Um, then in some ways that's great. And even some of my students who are now adults now, there's times where they'll always talk about Camp Marengo, that's like one of their best times of their lives. Because now they're kind of, especially some of them, they're out on their own. They're still single. They're out on their own. They're like in their mid to late 20s, maybe early 30s. And they're just, they're happy they get to do stuff, but they don't have that type of community, that real connection that they have had at camp. And they're dealing with a lot of stuff. And it's like, in some ways, I wish that camp was still open, or at least I wish some ways it could be like, hey, we're going to do kind of a marengo gathering. So if you're a student, a staff member, whatever, we're going to come, we're going to have some worship, we're going to have some food, we're just going to share stories, we're just going to do something just to kind of get people kind of remember, like, oh, yeah, this is one of the most influential and meaningful times of my life. And I probably knew it then, but especially if I didn't know it then, I definitely know it now.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shame that it's no longer a thing. But I mean, I would agree too, though. Like, I think church camps are crucial to the development of people that go, that are heavily involved in the church and or not, and it's like it's almost an outreach in the sense like you were explaining earlier. Um, I invite my non-church friend or non-Christian or non-Christ following friend to go to camp with me, and their life has changed forever as a result. It's it's such a great opportunity to see Jesus in the non-traditional light. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I couldn't agree more. You know, some of my greatest memories of church camp involve Marengo and Lebanon, and I'm thankful to have the opportunity to have gone to both. And it's sad to see that no longer exists. Um, but yeah, I think the church camps are important to the development of our teens, our kids, and um, I remember like even as a teenager, kind of as we're wrapping it up, like I looked forward so much to the summers because it wasn't because hey, I got to sleep in and be home and do stuff, but like, because my dad was a pastor, for a solid month or so, like 6 weeks out of my summer, I was doing a week of band camp where I had to go to camp for band. I had a week of summer camp for church. I helped with VBS. Like it was great because like I had all these different opportunities to be involved in different things, and I cherish those moments.
Yeah. And I would say for me, like, summer camp was probably the best thing as a confidence booster for me, as far as leadership. Because, when you're in school, you deal with so much drama and stuff in school. I think for a lot of times kids get picked on, they get bullied, or sometimes if you weren't like someone who got picked on, I mean, you're just trying to keep up appearances. You're just trying to, you're you, but you're not really you because you hang out with a certain crowd, so you kind of do things to kind of be part of that crowd. And I think what summer camp did for me is even times when I've had teachers or students feel like that, oh, I'm not going to make it, or I'm just a goof, or whatever the case may be, and kind of put me down, summer camp was a way that people kind of built me up to the point where even as I got older and into my senior year, I was a lot more confident. And I was like, what? I'm going to do theater. I'm going to try out and do theater. Or, hey, I'm going to try and campaign to become vice president of our student senate. And I ended up getting it. And I don't think it was just because of, oh, I was that good or I was that popular in school. I think it was because I had the confidence. And I think a lot of that came from summer camp because I had students and I had counselors and I had staff members who basically saw potential in me to be something great. And if I just relied on my self worth, on if I was going to be great or not based on the school system, then I'm probably wouldn't be successful with what I've done in my life if I haven't had summer camps.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
Yeah. So, friends, tell us your stories. What do you think? Do you think summer camps are more important than ever? Are you someone who had a summer camp that shuttered down, and maybe you're a parent and you're like, man, I really wish the camp that I went to was open because I would send my kids there in a heartbeat. Like, we want to know your camp stories. We want to know about how you're dealing with the mourning process where your camp was shuttered. And also, what are your opinions? Do you think that summer camps are more important now, than more now than ever? Like, they're very important now, and you wish that these summer camps that are closing their doors. Like, you wish that they didn't, because there's just so much potential to really see transformation and change within your students. So friends, thank you so much for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll be back on with another episode. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. The Scott Stedman podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman podcast. Thank you so much for listening.